Hello and welcome to EE333. I'm your instructor, Gregory Myers. In this video, we're back to our user driver.java. And what we'd like to do now is we'd like to use our console application to essentially drive our graphical user interface. This is helpful for a number of reasons, and perhaps setting up the initial values in an application, but also in essentially testing the application as well. So sometimes you can't do extensive graphical user interface testing because the application itself is written poorly in that it doesn't separate out the view from the model. If you followed along in the previous videos, you've seen that we have taken great pains to be able to properly wrap our user into a user panel and then wrap our user panel and use it in a user frame. So in this video, what I want to do is I want to look at how to drive the user frame using command line arguments. Now, you recall this structure where we were simply just triaging our switches, at which point I want to add an additional switch here. So we're going to have an else if, and this particular switch is still going to expect args dot length equal to 2. The difference is going to be, though, we want to look at the 0th argument, and instead of having just simply import, what we want to do is we want to have an import custom, but we want to somehow indicate that this is different from our earlier import custom. And specifically what I'd like to do is I'd like to have a user frame dot import custom. So what I want to do is I essentially want to launch the user frame using the console application and then turning around and actually driving it. And to do that then, let's see here where we've got a mismatched set of parentheses. Let's see here, there we go. The first thing we need to do is we need to figure out how to launch a graphical user interface from the command line. So in Java, this is surprisingly simple. And so what we want to do first is we want to create a temporary variable. We have our results up here, but what we'd like to do is we'd like to create another temporary variable. That is going to be a user frame. So it's going to be of type EE333 dot user frame. And to keep consistent with the nomenclature, I'm just going to lowercase the u. I'm not going to initialize it yet until I need it for this particular switch. And so in this case, then what I want to do is I want to say user frame is going to be equal to a new EE333 dot user frame. And essentially what that does is that then initializes the user frame object. And from there, then what we want to do is we want to say user frame dot set visible, and we want to set that to true. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. I'm going to go ahead and save it, build it, and then I want to come back over here to the console, which we haven't seen in a couple of videos, and type in dir. There's our EE333 folder. Just a reminder what is inside of it. dir again, you'll see there are all of our classes. Let's actually go ahead and back out just a little bit. And what we want to do now is we want to call our EE333 and our user driver. And we're going to do it with no arguments for just a second, just so that we're reminded of how this works. Ideally, we'd put a help in there. But now what I want to do is I want to provide it the user frame dot import custom. And provided that I've spelled it correctly, if I hit enter, it's not going to do anything. Why? Because I don't have a additional switch or additional argument rather. And that additional argument should be the name of our file. So we're going to go ahead and call it with a sample.user. Now, you should immediately see an error. Well, that error stems from the fact that we needed our states.txt file to be able to seed our pop-up menu. So right now our pop-up menu is empty. And also we didn't even have a sample.user file. So this is a good opportunity for us to understand where Java is looking for those files. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to our folder that has the samples, sample user and the states. We're going to go ahead and make a copy of them. We're going to come into our build folder and into our classes folder, and we're going to go ahead and paste it in the same directory as our EE333 subfolder. And then we're going to rerun it, and we're going to see if we have in fact made Java happy. And sure enough, it was looking at the folder that I ran the Java JRE from in order to find the states.txt. And so sure enough, there we go. All right, now, how do we get that sample user into our graphical user interface? Well, in the earlier examples, in the earlier video, and actually in two of the earlier videos, what we did was we actually leveraged hard coding that file name into the initialization function or the constructor. We don't want to do that this time around. Instead, what we want to do is we want to pass whatever argument was in arg1, we want to pass that now to the GUI. And specifically what we want to do is we want to pass it to the user frame. Well, the user frame itself doesn't have a method that exposes a way to pass a file to it. Okay, so in other words, there's our J button import action performed and our J button export action performed. And then also too, if you note, the different controls are all private. So what we would need to do is one of two things. We would need to expose a public method that would allow for us to test the GUI, or we would want to convert one of the text fields to public, particularly the JText input. So we could change this from private to public. Or what we could do is we could create a public method that then could be called by our user driver.java. So in keeping with our theme of encapsulation, what I want to do is I want to come along and I want to add one more method here. I am going to go ahead and make it a public method. And it doesn't really matter whether it's a void or a Boolean, but I'm going to make a public Boolean. And you can play around with the names for this. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to call this import custom. And this import custom is also going to accept a java.io.file, and it's going to accept an input file. So hopefully you're sensing somewhat of a theme here. And I'm just going to hard code in return results. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize a Boolean results equal to true. And then what this will do is it's going to do two things, actually. It's going to say this dot JText input dot set text. And what it's going to do is it's going to use the input file dot and then get the name of the file. You could also get the path if you wanted to. Either is perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, for a little bit of variety here, we're actually going to just use the get path. And then the second thing that we want for it to do is we're actually going to say this .j button import. And in this case, what we want it to do is we want it to actually call then the event handler. Okay, so you've got a couple of ways to go about doing this. So you can either call the JButton import action performed directly. So in other words, what you would do is you would do something along these lines where you simply called the method itself. So this dot JButton import action performed, in which case what you would have to do is you would have to pass a particular event, or you could just simply pass null. Or what you could do is you can say this dot JButton import dot do click, and that is as if the, not sure where that template came into play. Let's try that one more time. So you would do a do click, and that would essentially act as if you had called, or you had come along and clicked on the button itself. So this is essentially a way of programmatically running your interface. It's going to run whatever event handlers are associated with a particular button. So you got two different ways that you can go about doing this as far as calling a specific button, or rather a specific event handler. So let's go ahead and save this real quick. Let's see what happens. We're going to come out here to our command window one more time. In this case, we're going to go ahead and call our user driver using the import custom sample.user. We forgot one critical step here though. We didn't go back into our user driver and tell it that we had one more thing we wanted it to do. And so our user frame dot import custom, and what we want to do now is we want to create a new java.io file, and we simply want to make it out of the args square brackets 1. Now clearly we'd want to do some sort of error checking here, because if that file doesn't exist, that's not going to end well. But let's go ahead and build it, and we're going to go ahead and run it. And now you notice that automatically my contents pops up inside my J panel. One minor difference between these two methods, the do click and calling the JButton import action performed directly, is that if you notice that when you run the do click, if you run it with the do click, you wind up with this artifact up here in the top left-hand corner for the import button. And if you right click on the do click method and you look at the method associated with the underlying method associated with it, if you follow along with it, you'll see that there is a paint immediately new rectangle at the location of 0, 0. Now, we can choose to control that behavior, or what we can do is we can simply use the direct call to the action performed method, in which case, if I were to run this once again, let's go ahead and build it. And then if you would run it once again, you'll see that I do not have that artifact up there. In both cases, essentially what this does is this allows for you to set up the graphical user interface automatically, and the only extra effort is that in your user frame, you essentially have to expose what methods you want to call, or in this case, what fields that you want to set, because those are all going to be private. So once again, hopefully you found this video useful. It once again emphasizes on how you can launch a GUI from the command line. It's a useful tool not only in automation, but also in testing. At the very least, it helps you set up your graphical user interface for commonly done tasks. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to email me, and thank you for watching.